Well, hello, everybody. It's Wednesday and time for Scaled Down. So welcome to the Scaled Down Livestream, where we dive into all aspects about downsizing, aging, and everything in between. I'm your host, Natalie Lewin, and each week we bring you expert insights, personal stories, and practical advice to help navigate you through these important life transitions. Today, we are thrilled to have Sarah Mumtaz with us, a dynamic expert in wills and estate planning, known for her ability to demystify complex topics with a touch of humor. Sarah makes estate planning both engaging and approachable. When Sarah isn't working, she is often volunteering at Pro Bono Ontario, giving free legal advice to vulnerable persons. Get ready to gain valuable insights and have some fun while learning about these essential topics. In today's episode, we'll dive into what it means to have a will and how it impacts your estate planning. We'll explore the consequences of not having a will and why it's crucial to get this right. Join us as we make sense of these important topics and uncover practical tips to ensure your wishes are clearly documented and protected. So whether you're interested in doing a new will, doing one for the first time, or you're just here seeking some inspiration, you're in the right place. So let's dive right in. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And then you know what? Before we dive in, how are you doing? How's summer treating you? I know you're on a wild European trip, and I want to know how that was and how your son did on the long flight.
Yes, everything is great. We're enjoying the sunshine. It's just a summer filled with splash pads and pools and all things summer. So that's really great. We have a cottage trip coming up, which is going to be very fun, I hope. And we just got back from almost 2 months away in Europe. And we took our then 6-month-old, and now he's about 9 months. He had a fantastic time, just exposure to different languages, super friendly, had lots of fun, tried all different kinds of food, went to different types of beaches, and just lounged out and had a great time.
Fabulous. I'm so glad. And so where in Europe did you go?
Yeah, so we did south of Spain and south of France. So it was, just beachy vibes everywhere. It was really, really nice.
And good wine. Good
wine. Yes. Some wine I never tried before, some that I was able to go to the source for, I guess you could say. And just, great wine, great food, great people, friendly. And it was just a fantastic time.
I love that. So my daughter and I were in the south of France last summer.
Yeah.
And after months and months and months of me being dry, I broke that dry spell and had wine, and it just hit different than it did. Yeah. I heard that their sulfur content is much lower, hence why hangovers are less.
So interesting. Well, then that's that alone is a great advertisement to drink French wine.
Right? It's healthier.
It's great. It's better for you. That's right.
I love it. So let's dive right in. We should have called it Wills and Wines Wednesday.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Heavier topic. And the wine might, with your humor, get everybody through this.
Yeah, that's right. And I would have had a glass of wine ready to go if we had planned it for that. But That's all right.
That's all right. So let's get into it. So, can you explain
Yeah.
what a will is and why it's important that we have one?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you go, the only thing you can really leave behind instructions wise to your estate or to your loved ones is your testamentary document, which is your will. It's the only really document that anyone can look to get any sort of idea of what your wishes might be. It becomes, by then, really one of the most important documents in your possession.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful. So, can you tell us some misconceptions people have about wills and estate planning and
Yeah.
why,
Yeah.
why is this document that important? Like, what if we just happen to pass away and we don't have a will? Why is it so important that we have one?
Yeah. So coming off the heels of saying it's one of the most important documents that you'll have, it is the only document that allows you to have full control of what happens to your estate after you're gone. Without this document in place, you are stuck with the legislation that currently exists, which means the government gets to decide what happens to your estate, who has an interest in it, how it gets divided, and they get to set the protocols of what is required in order to administer your estate. So, some of the most common sort of misconceptions, like you asked, is people think that without a will, everything will just go to their spouse or then to their children. And that's not necessarily true, particularly when we're living in this day and age. It's not that, cookie cutter nuclear family. And even if it is, it's not all going to go to your spouse if you don't have a will. So things aren't going to be arranged the way that you may have thought. Again, the government has some say. The government has some money to be made out of this as well. There are, within the probate process as well, there's a requirement all of a sudden for a bond for the value of your estate, which can be really problematic and can be really cumbersome for the people left dealing with your estate, because now they have to put up a bond. These days, very little real estate is worth less than a million. I'm sure, Natalie, you can probably attest to that. Finding a home less than a million is rare. And so let's say that the basic estate is worth a million just based on the real estate itself. Well, now your executor is in a position to have to get a bond for $1 million. That is difficult. That's a credit score. That's having access to be able to get credit for that amount. It's not easy, and that can become very problematic.
Okay.
Yeah. So, to say the least.
So, what are the main legal implications? So, I know we kind of touched upon the legal implications of not having a will at the time of death. Can you touch more upon what those implications are?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's very fact specific. So, it depends on what the estate looks like. So, let's talk about an example or two. And then, of course, like I said, very generally, it doesn't go the way you necessarily would want it to go. But if we talked about an example, let's say you are in a common law relationship, and you've been living together for 30 years, you don't have a will, and you die. Your common law spouse is actually not entitled by default to anything in your estate. So what that means is that your estate will go to your biological next of kin.
Okay.
And that, again, if that's not your intention, if your intention was to leave your common law spouse with something, then that will only be accomplished if you had a will. This also opens your estate up to potential litigation. So even if your intention was to leave nothing to that common law spouse, having a will that outlined that specifically would help in preventing potentially some litigation down the road, or leaving anything to them that would allow them to, bar them from bringing litigation against the estate also would be useful. So there's an example for a common law example. If we talk about another example where there may be stepchildren or adopted children, and let's say you don't have any will at all, and you have, three biological children, and that's where the estate is going. Again, you've opened your estate up to litigation for other people or children that you may hold as your children, or that you intended to be included but didn't include because you didn't have a will. Well, this can be again problematic.
Okay. And so do you see a lot of that come across your desk?
I do. And the common law scenario, more than anything else, to be honest, I see quite frequently. Currently have a few files actually that are like this. And it's just, we live in a day and age where that, again, cookie cutter lifestyle of, we're married, we've got a son and a daughter, and that's it. We're neat and tidy packaged nuclear family. It doesn't exist. There are blended families are a reality. Marriages, remarriages, prenuptial agreements in place. That's a whole other topic. I think we can talk about that, but they all come into play here. And if we don't have our estate planning documents in place, well, we're leaving our estate to pick up the pieces and try to piece together what someone who's deceased and can't speak for themselves any longer would have wanted, or maybe said while they were alive, that could have all been avoided if they actually used their voice to voice their concerns or their wishes through their testamentary documents.
Fabulous. It's a lot. I was going to say beautiful, but wow, it's heavy. And but such information that's needed. Because so many, and I've seen it too, everybody's happy, siblings are happy together, but parents die, didn't leave a will, and now fights are happening.
That's right. Yeah. And, parents sometimes think, oh, kids all get along, everything will be fine. But sometimes it's not that simple. I mean, even if the siblings get along, like I had a file actually where mom left cottage property to 4 children. And in her will, she did have a will in this case, stated that, if something happens to one child, it goes to their survivors, meaning their children. Well, now that property that went to 4 people is now split between 8 people because that son or daughter died, and they have 4 children who are now in place and all of a sudden have a title interest in this cottage. And let me tell you, 8 people do not get along in deciding how things are going to be sold, or when they're going to be sold, or for what price, or what needs to be done, and who gets to use the property. And all of this could have been avoided if we had done the will, if she had done the will with someone who kind of had the foresight to bring up those potential, pitfalls. Absent a will, you'd be in a very similar situation as well.
Right. Lots to think about. Okay. So you touched on this, that, there's 8 people, somebody died to get the 8 people in place of that one person, plus the 3 other siblings. So how does having a will impact the distribution of the assets, and if something happens, like, so somebody passes away and somebody is in place of somebody takes their asset, how does having a will mitigate that?
Yeah. So having a properly drafted will can again, you can avoid some of those pitfalls. Honestly, it really comes down to what asset there is. And then having the counsel, the appropriate counsel, to advise you on the potential, issues that may arise with the disposition of that particular asset. So it may be, if we've got, $20,000 sitting in a bank account, and you say, well, 10,000 to one child, 10,000 to the other child. And then if they predecease me, then to their children, that might be simple because it's a simple distribution because it's cash. But when we're talking about things like property, when we're talking about registered investments or assets, things start to become a little bit less simple because there are tax consequences. There are, of course, property issues and that sort of thing. So having a will that's drafted by a lawyer can help you with that, because we can advise you on how best to distribute it. So maybe it's not, whether it's this cottage property, it's going to go to so-and-so. Maybe we put in, that this particular person would have their first right of refusal. If they die, then, these people can buy out the sibling first and then the kids, and that's just one, quick example, but there can be lots of ways to deal with it. But this is typically the area where, and I see this actually with wills that clients draft for themselves. So those online wills that I cringe at, because those show up on my desk a lot because they're in court. But you wouldn't be able to foresee that necessarily,
Right.
or be able to draft in a way that can mitigate some of those issues, based on your wishes, of course. And this is where having a professional draft your will for you comes in to save the day.
Got it. Perfect. So I actually want to go back to the example you
Yeah.
used of somebody drafting a will, but leaving a provision that if somebody passes, it goes to somebody else.
Yeah.
So would that now, instead of it being split between the four, do the
Yeah.
now deceased family, do they have one share or the same percentage as the person who passed, or is it now divided equally among the 8 people?
So typically what would happen is the deceased, their share would be split between 4 people. So those 4 people would get a smaller,
Okay. Okay.
but again, if you don't have it drafted properly, you
Right.
could inadvertently be giving a different distribution than what you would have intended if that
Right.
was your intention.
Right. Because I was saying when you said 8 people now, it's like, but it's just one person. Do
Yeah,
they split let's say 25%? Okay.
right.
Okay.
But
That's what I
in
but
in a real property, situation, it is 8 people deciding, because as you know, with real estate, it doesn't matter if you have a 2% interest or a 10% interest or a 50% interest, you have an interest in the property. So
right.
it can be a bad situation if you've got too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So, can you walk us through the process that typically follows if someone dies intestate?
Yeah. So on an intestacy, of course, there is no executor. So the person who would be, um, well, technically anyone who has an interest in the estate can make an application to the court to become an executor. Now, often what we see is the next of kin. So if let's say, you die, you've got children of age of majority, they can, either one or all of them could make an application to the court to be named executor. In another instance, if you've got, minor children or no children and you've got siblings, the siblings can, or one sibling, let's say, decides they want to make the application to the court, they can, but then they have to go and seek consent from every other sibling to
Okay.
be named. Once all the consents are in place, you follow through with what's called a probate application. And these are a little bit different because there is no will to show the bank. So the banks are very reluctant to provide you with any account information. So
Mm,
what that means is you have an obligation in your application to disclose to the court the value of the estate. Now,
okay.
if you're unable to access the value of the estate, you have to provide the court with an estimated value, which means you now have a subsequent obligation to the court to notify them of the exact value. So typically this is done by way of an undertaking. So it'll be, quite a package that you'll be filing with the court. And you'll let the court know that you'll update them once you know. The court will also want you to post a bond for the value of the estate. So if you know that there's, a few properties and the value's worth $3 million, for example, and I'm being, just throwing out a number there, but you will have to then obtain a bond and a bond company. Now, if you're a sibling who's not a Canadian resident, this offers, greater sort of loopholes and red tape for you. And you certainly will have to get a bond if you're not a Canadian resident. And then you proceed with your application. Once you've been appointed, then you can start going back and getting all the information, and then you have to pay your probate taxes to the Minister of Finance, and you've got to update the court, and then you can start dealing with the estate.
Wow. That's
So
so people get your
yeah,
will.
get your
Uh,
will. Yeah.
yeah. That brings me to a sale that I had, and I don't know that he died intestate, but I don't think they could verify the will, and it
Mm.
took nearly 2 years for probate, and then to actually have them to be able to sell the property. It
Yeah.
took a long time. We had
Yeah.
to go through a lot of hoops
Yeah.
to get us to the finish line, and it
That's right.
cost them more money.
And it costs more money. That's it. That's the biggest thing. And the other problem is when you don't have a will to show the banks, and perhaps rightfully so, they won't talk to you. They won't provide you with any information. They won't even let you open an estate account, and that's banks. So you can just imagine what it would be like to call any utility company, or call Rogers to cancel a cell phone. It can become so cumbersome, and it can become very difficult. Whereas if you've got the will, while the court, will only accept an original and will proceed with the probate application with the will, handing out notarized copies of the wills to some of these institutions is sufficient for them to be able to go ahead and either close accounts or transfer accounts to estates, to the estate account rather. So it can really, really streamline the process for your executor who, and this is not costing the estate at that point. But if the Rogers bill is coming through every month, or you're unable to move some funds and bills are going out that shouldn't be going out, but they won't talk to you because you're not a named executor, you're costing the estate money as well, as the time and effort it's taking you to be able to chase everybody down.
And that's exactly what this was. And the gentleman was not sick, or I think he had a heart attack. I'm not sure the exact reason for death, but
Yeah.
he just happened to pass away in his house. And he had a car. There are so many little things, little pieces that could not be dealt with because
Yeah.
they couldn't verify that will. And
That's
so
right.
they had to go through the motion
Yeah.
of verifying the will, going through the probate. So it took long and it was costly.
That's right. Yeah.
End of
It
story.
is
Long
very
and
costly.
costly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not an easy, I mean, you can just think about having to deal with like your utility company or deal with the internet company. It's annoying when you're alive and you're well and you're speaking for yourself. And now if you're dealing with all this for someone else, and they are just really difficult to deal with, at times. And so it's better to have it. And I, just touching on that as well, there's oftentimes people don't think about their will until they say, well, now I'll do it when I'm older, or I'll do it when I have grandkids, or they see it really more as a gray, issue. And it's
Right.
not. It's, if you have an asset, you should have a will. Simple as
Yes.
that. No matter your age, no matter your health, nothing, you should have a will.
Right. Because anything could happen at any time.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Um, so we already touched on this. I wanted to talk about expensive, and maybe you can go a little bit deeper
Sure.
in why is it more expensive to not have a will than to have one?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, for all the reasons we just touched on as well, the estate is still paying their bills, money is still coming in and out, when maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe some contracts, they end on the death of the person who, entered into the contract. So if those contracts should be null and void as of the date of death, but you've been unable to get through, or you've been unable to talk to anyone because no one's talking to you, these bills are still being paid, and essentially, good luck getting a refund. Like, they are just depleting the, estate. Second, just the probate application process itself without a will is just a lot more work. So you will be paying increased legal fees, most likely, to deal with the, probate application itself. Past that, you're dealing with, just, it really is like just all the information gathering, right? And your time and your effort. Whereas if you had the will and you presented the will to everyone that you needed to get information from, it's as simple as, here's the will, I'm the executor, give me this information, and boom, you're done. You can talk to everyone and anyone. You can file overdue taxes. I've seen that for some people who may not have filed in the last few years of their life. And an executor can do that for them, but you can't gather any of that information. So all these reasons, it can be very expensive. But I would say nothing more expensive than your entire estate going to the wrong person and not going the way that you had intended for it to go. So
Right.
if you have, again, common law spouse, they've got two children that you've raised since they were a year or 2 years old, and you hold them out to be just as if they were your children, and they're adults now, they're married, and you want them to have something. They won't unless you have that will. So it's very important to have that in place.
So I've heard that, let's say 40 years old, married, few kids, and something changed. Life changes, life happens. And there was a will that they did, I don't know, 20 years ago.
Yep.
What would you advise in ensuring that your will is always kept up to date?
Yeah. So depending on the estate itself, what the estate will look like, so what your portfolio looks like, um, you should be taking a look at your estate documents at least every 3 years. And if not, you should always have it in the back of your mind if there are any significant life changes. So that means, if there's a marriage, a divorce, anyone you named in the will, if they've died, if there's a change in the relationship for the people that you've appointed. Common one we always see is minor children now are adults, and it's maybe time to update who your executor is, because you don't need, friend or neighbor to act anymore. Now, child is old enough and they can perhaps act. Things like that. If there's some sort of disability or anything that happens, those would all be considered significant life events. But I always advise my clients, for clients who are, higher net worth and want, some advice on an annual basis for their corporate, as well as their personal wills. We do an annual review. And for any other sort of my clients, we do a review every 2 or 3 years. I personally don't charge for those reviews. It's just a quick chat to see if how things are going, whether you really need a will update or not, and you may not, right? Sometimes laws change, so it is a good idea to check in with your lawyer, because lawyers are not going to reach out to every single person in their list of clientele to say, hey, there's been a recent change in the law, let's update those wills. The onus is going to be on the client. And I don't know about any other profession, but if I wasn't a lawyer, I wouldn't be checking for law updates. So it is important that you sort of keep a reminder to check in with your lawyer every 2 or 3 years, just to say, hey, are there any changes? Does everything still look good? And hopefully you can get some guidance on that front.
Got it. Thank you. So I know there's usually some special provisions parents put in their wills if they have minor children. Is there anything similar or special provisions that people should think about when their kids are now age of majority?
Yeah. So for minor children, I mean, typically what we see are things, trusts, with respect to, who gets to hold the money. There's guardianship provisions, of course, for minor children. Once they become adults, it's not necessarily the case that once they're 18, you want them to have all the money. Let's say, again, you've got $500,000 that's going to go to an 18-year-old. They're probably not going to spend necessarily very wisely. So you may want to increase that age to maybe, I've seen, 21, 23, 25. I don't know why odd numbers are popular, but they are. And maybe that correlates with by then they'll have their degree, or by then they'll be in a more settled frame of mind where they want to put maybe a down payment on a house, or maybe by this age they might have some children, and then they'll think a little bit more long-term with how they are going to spend this money. Things like that can still be in the will, and they can still be made as provisions for adults. If you have any children that are maybe not they're maybe spendthrift, they don't save very well, you're a little bit concerned about how they may spend the money once they've got it, and you'd like for it to be spent wisely. There is some control beyond the grave, I guess you could say, where you can have those you can have those provisions in your will to ensure that it's not going to be just spent and lost. There can be some provisions to outline how those funds are to be spent, and that. Mhm.
Okay, perfect. That I like that control beyond the grave, because
Yeah,
you don't want the hard-earned money,
that's
and
right.
your child, if they're not that um, savvy, let's say, with money,
Yeah,
that you want it to be distributed, whether it's monthly, yearly, or however, so that they don't run out of money.
yeah.
Okay, so what are the key documents and information somebody should gather before meeting with an estate lawyer like yourself?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you really should have a good idea of what assets you have, where they are, how much they're worth, approximately how much they're worth. If you've got registered assets, like TFSAs, RSPs, pensions, life insurance, gathering some of that information to be able to share with your lawyer, determining whether any beneficiary designations are in place, whether you've got any segregated funds, just all of that, your entire financial portfolio, that should all be on the ready to share with your lawyer when you start having those estate planning discussions. And then, of course, any details. I think sometimes I find some clients are almost like, "Why are you asking me this?" Right? But with things like family history, or sometimes there's that evil aunt or evil uncle or evil child sometimes, right? That has there's some bad blood there maybe, and we do need to talk about that. We need to have that in our notes so that we can protect your estate if so and so was to come out of the woodwork. So things like that, that's really the most important. I always tell my clients, this is an entirely confidential conversation between you and I. This does not leave this room. And if there's anyone that need to be honest with, it would be me. And we of course respect and offer that respect to our clients, and dignity, and keep everything very confidential, and try to make this conversation as comfortable as possible. But all of those things can be important just in order to protect your estate later, because again, we're really talking about a time where people, and that meaning anyone interested in your estate, are speaking for you.
Right.
So if we can document anything, it would be through your lawyer. But this is your opportunity to speak and have that voice.
I have a question, and I don't know if this is just Hollywood,
Yeah.
but what does the reading of a will look like?
That doesn't happen in Canada. It
Okay.
doesn't happen in Canada. It's a US thing. Yes, they show it in all the movies. That does not happen in Canada. Wills can be as private or as public as you want them to be, or certain assets can be as private or as public as you want them to be. There are ways to draft. So sometimes, and I've seen this, there's money that you want to go to someone that you don't want your family to know, or you don't want the people in your personal will to know about, and there are dual will strategies to achieve that. But essentially, anyone who has an interest in your estate will receive a copy of the page that outlines their interest, and that's really all they're entitled to see.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, that's interesting. Um, so, what are some of the best practices for communicating one's wishes to family members to avoid conflicts beyond the grave?
Yeah. So while I always advise, so when clients sign their documents with me, they do take their originals home. I always advise them, let your executors know where you keep it, but nobody needs a copy of your will. And I have clients that do that anyways, and they hand out copies to, XYZ person. And the problem with that is if everyone has a copy of your will, if you ever change it later and it conflicts with what you originally drafted, this is an invitation to litigation, right? We're creating a scenario for litigation here. There are some instances, particularly if there's an unequal distribution, and again, depending on the relationship that you may have with your children or your loved ones named in the will, you may want to have that conversation. I always say, and again, it really depends on the relationship, but you don't necessarily need to talk about your will with your loved ones. It is a document that's really for you. And again, if there is anything that you wish for them to know after the fact, perhaps it's why you made a certain decision to have one child have more money than the other in your will. We can always put that in the document itself. We can always add a testament to allow them to understand why, and it helps save you from some of the awkward and uncomfortable conversations in your lifetime, if that's what you wish.
Okay, fair enough. So this was really good. Before we call it quits, I have some rapid fire questions for you.
All right.
And so first one,
Yep.
beaches or mountain?
Beaches.
Ooh, coffee or wine?
That's a hard one, Natalie. That's a hard one. I'm going to say wine because you know what? Coffee is only good in the morning anyway. So
Wine's good at 1:00 is any time of
that's
day.
right. 1 o'clock is any time.
So if you had to choose, dead or alive, somebody to have lunch with, who would it be?
My mom, alive. And but I love spending time with that woman. She's fantastic.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And so what's your go-to karaoke song?
Ooh, Bohemian Rhapsody. It is that it's Bohemian Rhapsody always.
So can you sing a line or two for us?
Oh, I cannot. I'm a horrible singer and I avoid karaoke. And the sad part is my husband loves karaoke. So I will indulge him and make a fool of myself. I am much better a lawyer than a singer. There's no alternative career for me.
I love that. So I'm not a singer either, but I love karaoke. And I think I hear a different tone than others may hear. So it's all good.
Yeah. What's your go-to?
Right. What's my go-to? Oh my God. I don't really have one, but I love, oh gosh, what is it? I was singing My Life Away in the car today, and it's a Mary J. Blige song.
Okay.
And I can't remember the song.
You'll have to let us all know when you remember that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much. As you all know, I'm Natalie Lewin with Lux Transitions, a realtor with Keller Williams. I specialize in helping adults 65 and older scale down to their next chapter. I'm passionate about assisting and educating my people on this important piece of their journey. So if you or someone you know is considering a transition to a smaller space, please DM me to schedule a discovery call. Remember, life is beautiful, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Tune in next week, same time, same place. We'll be speaking with another lawyer, Leanne Townsend, about gray divorce and how they differ from other divorces and what you need to do if you find yourself going down this road. So take care until next time.